All right. Welcome, everyone, to this session titled How to Get It Right by Being Wrong All the Time. My name is Johan Öbrink. I work as a digital strategist for SEB, which is one of the largest banks in the Nordics and the Baltics. I'm also an irregular TV expert, where I try to explain and contextualize various fuck-ups and disasters in the digital area. I sing in a chamber choir. I'm an allotment owner. I like digging. I'm also a self-defense instructor. And a father of two. Also the product manager for Sab Neo, which is a new product that we're developing at SEB. I'm not actually here to talk about Neo as a product, but rather as a vehicle for changing how we work at SEB. But just to contextualize a bit, Neo was born out of two OKRs, that's objective and key results, for CMPC, that's corporate and private customers, which is basically the part of SEB that handles private customers and corporations up to, I think it's like 5 billion Swedish kronor turnover, something like that. And those two OKRs were rejuvenate the customer base, as in bring in more younger customers, and the other one was try out SEBX banking as a service platform to see if it works for us to be sort of customers to ourselves. And to those two OKRs, we also added ourselves, because why make it easy? We added creating the capacity within SEB to produce mobile apps and also explore new ways of working. So the thing was, we went into this project thinking that we were going to build a bank for kids, because that's what we had before, the youth bank. What we realized after interviewing kids and parents and experts such as researchers and teachers was that the challenge was a lot bigger than we thought. Kids don't need a bank, they need access to money at all. Because the thing is, in Sweden, Sweden is basically a completely cashless society. A lot of shops do not accept cash. Which means that since small kids don't have bank cards, it basically leads to their parents having to act as their banks. So the parents will borrow their bank card to the kid, lend it out, and the kid can go into the shop and buy something, which means that now the parents have to keep track of how much they spent, so they're financing and banking and keeping score. And also, the kids are totally blind to what happens to the money. They have no insight, and they get no training. So when looking at how kids relate to money, we found that they understand virtually nothing. Whereas where they relate to virtual money, such in Roblox or FIFA or Pokemon Go, it works excellently, because there they can actually practice. So we sort of formulated our mission statement as such. Sab Neo invites children into the digital economy and guides them as they mature financially. So basically, how can we build like a safety and support system that makes you feel comfortable giving an 8-year-old a bank card and sending them off to school? That's sort of the question, because it's actually the only means of payment that you have at that age. And how can we build an app that also teaches and guides children as they use their money and save their money, so that they can sort of understand it the way they do in Roblox? But hey, I hear you. You're asking, what are you doing being a product manager? I mean, you're a digital strategist. Shouldn't you be like strategizing digitality or something? Yeah, that's a good point. But so here's the deal. I started working at SB some 2.5 years ago, a dewy-eyed wee lad, just 47 years old, with a lust for adventure and a will to change the archaic ways of this massive institution. It turns out that's hard. So I tried a few ways, like I tried to help others improve. I went to them saying, like, can I guide you? Can I show you better ways of working? That did not work. because they had far too much to do to have any time to improve how they did it. So then I thought, what about like changing the organizational structure? You know, clarifying mandates and roles and stuff like that. And that definitely did not work, because now people got even less done because they were stuck in meetings discussing mandates and roles. So I tried to show them the numbers. Like the numbers from, for example, the State of DevOps report from DORA. The gains that we could make according to them. Like, look, it's like 6,570 times faster from commit to production. We're talking lead time. It's just that the numbers are so big that if you haven't experienced this before, you basically just think that I'm crazy. So I thought, okay, right, I'll just show you. That's the only way to do it. And so Neo was sort of the perfect place for this, because since it's an exploratory project, it sort of comes with a high tolerance for doing things differently. And since it's an essentially new customer group, there are like no toes to step on. So it was perfect for just carving out a small niche inside the bank and say, okay, right here, we're going to do things differently. So let's do this my way. Well, actually, not my way at all, because I didn't invent any of this. This is all public knowledge. I just decided to trust the researchers and the experts and the people who have tried this before. Maybe they know something, know a little bit more than me. So let's just go with it. So basically, I think that this can all be summarized in the first principle of the Agile Manifesto, which is that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So let's break it down. Early delivery. Well, that's basically an MVP, right? An MVP is basically just the price you have to pay to earn the customer's attention so they are willing to start talking to you and tell you what you should be doing. So we need an MVP. Second part, continuous delivery. Right, so that means automation, automated builds, automated deployments, automated environments, automated regression tests, so you know that you didn't just break something. So in Neo, we use trunk-based development. So basically, every code push results in the building of affected artifacts. These artifacts are like Docker images, or in the case of the mobile app, it's built at Bitrise. Every time a new container is built or new image, the deployment scripts get updated with the hash of that image and then checked back into GitHub, which means that now the GCP, Google Cloud, will react again and say, oh, the Terraform or the version's changed, so let's deploy that into dev. Then it goes into a second phase where we do contract testing. Now, contract testing takes a bit longer, so because it has to spin up like the part of the system that changed along with the databases and the queue and stuff like that. So you basically test it like a black box. Request goes in, response comes out, this should have happened, message ended up on the queue. Does it work according to spec? So that takes a bit longer. If those tests pass, we update the version for the AC environment, which is also our pilot environment where we have our pilot customers. Then it goes into a third stage of security testing. If those tests pass, then we update the version for the production environment. And so, last point, sorry. Valuable, very important part. Valuable. How do we know that what we're building is valuable? Well, we ask the customers, right? So what we need to do is we need to get hold of some people who are willing to test the product, that we can deliver new products, new versions of the product to continuously, and have a conversation and help them tell us where we're wrong, what works, what doesn't work, any new ideas. So in this simple first principle, you basically encapsulate all of Agile. But did you notice that it said nothing about stand-ups, or backlogs, or refinements, or velocity. So I think this is the current state of Agile in our industry right at the moment. These are pictures from the Melanesian Islands soon after World War II. The Americans had air bases there, and the air bases were basically, they were shipping in supplies constantly to feed these air bases. And when they left, the tribes who lived there had studied what the Americans did, and they wanted the supplies back. So they tried to repeat the rituals that the Americans performed to summon the planes. So they built airstrips, and they built radar dishes and equipment. But of course, the planes did not return, because it wasn't the rituals at all. So this is the source of the term cargo culting, because they built a cult around the cargo. And like that, Agile has become a modern cargo cult, where not even the priests understand the rituals, and thus they don't understand why it never works. So I'm not going to use the A word anymore. Instead, I'm going to talk about autonomous teams, what it's like and why it's important, the McDonald's principle, the importance of being wrong, real user stories, and storytelling and how stories shape the world. So, first point, autonomous teams. How do you form an autonomous team? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to start treating the people in the team as adults, not children. You need to treat them as professionals. So basically what that means is that the team decides what to do, they decide how to do it, they choose their tools, they choose who we hire next. The team makes its own decisions without outside interference, because we know and we trust that the team is based off of adults who are professionals. They don't need to be managed, they need to be trusted. I actually saw this model quite recently, where a colleague of mine was explaining how we usually do stuff at SAB. And so the idea is basically that when you build a product, you have like the business person that looks after the business, like profits and such. And then you have the tech persons that focus on techie stuff, that is, like secure and fast and cool and stuff like that. And then you have the CX, the customer experience person, that looks after the customer. And all these three roles, they have their domains, which they defend from the others, so they don't destroy it. And by this sort of creative battle, you get some sort of balance. And I claim that this is just wrong. Yes, the teams need all these skills. All these skills are needed to build a good product. But it's not about performing your role. It's more like everyone brings their experience and their expertise to the table, and then we sit down together and we figure out how we can please our customer. So we're going to need the knowledge from the business expert, the understanding of the business. We're going to need knowledge of programming and design and user experience. But it's a collaborative effort. So the idea of conflicting interests leads to sad compromises, whereas the idea of co-creation breeds excellence and unwavering dedication towards creating something that the customers can love. But what about risk? What about compliance? What about legal and security? I mean, after all, we're a bank. Well, that's the thing about professionals. We sort of tend to know when we lack the required expertise. So instead of approaching our assessors, as they're called, the ones like looking at the product and seeing if it's viable to release, Instead of going to them to obtain sort of clearance or permission to release, we went to them early and we brought them into the team and we said, hey guys, we need your expertise. We want you to help us build a product that is secure, that is compliant, where we have control over the risk, which is legal. And since they are also adults and professionals, they gladly accepted. In fact, they were actually pleasantly surprised to be treated as assets rather than just like an obstacle that you would have to pass at some point. Has anyone heard about the McDonald's principle? No one? Okay, so it's basically this. Say you're going out to lunch with a bunch of colleagues, and you're like, so where should we go? Where do you want to go? Everyone is quiet. No one says anything. What you do then is you say, I know, let's go to McDonald's. Because then all of them will have suggestions of other places to go to. Another way of putting this is, I saw this tweet where it basically says, like, I put a question on Stack Overflow, then I give it the wrong answer from another account, and then I get a bunch of correct answers, because no one on the internet wants to help you, but everyone wants to correct you. Because it is, as Henry Ford never said, that if we had asked our customers what they wanted, they would have answered faster horses. It's easier to build on an idea than to create one out of thin air. It's easier to correct what is wrong than to summarize what is important. And it's easier to speak up and have an opinion if somebody already had the courage to do it. So this has been a leading principle of how we approach people from the Neo product team when we need their help. We come to them with a suggestion that they can then build on and correct and tell us where it's wrong and what it should be instead. So we never ask, we always suggest. And a lot of times, I mean, I said the McDonald's principle builds some, like giving a really dumb suggestion. A lot of times we are wrong, but not always. Sometimes it's pretty good. But when it is wrong, I think that's a very important skill to have. Since that being wrong is one of the things that scares adults the most. We're afraid of losing face or being perceived as stupid. But acknowledging that we are wrong is vital if we want to change and improve. If you're trying to be right all the time, it's going to lead to you defending obviously bad decisions. If you are assuming that you might be wrong, it means that you're constantly searching for improvements. It's a completely different mindset, but you have to be willing to put yourself in that position. So take this trunk-based development, for example. It actually started with, I follow Dave Farley. He has a YouTube channel called Continuous Delivery. He wrote the Continuous Delivery book with Jess Humble. And I really enjoy that. I listen to it a lot. And it's like, almost all the time, I know what he's talking about. I've heard those things before. I always agree with him. But it's nice to get like new perspectives on it. But there was one thing that we didn't agree on. Because we were using pull requests. And we liked them, and it worked. And he hates pull requests. So basically what I did was I went to the team one day and I said, it's so weird, like he's always right about stuff and he thinks we should not be using pull requests. What do you say we just give it a try? And they were like, yeah, sure, let's do that. So we started during the summer when it was just 2 people in the office. So they started basically just like pushing to main. So we minimized the potential damage. And we said, when we come back from vacation, let's talk about it. See what we learn. And the sort of surrounding or overarching idea was this. If you manage to push something that goes into production, although it was broken, or something that breaks the builds, that means something is wrong with the system. Then we stop, we evaluate, and we improve the system. And if we keep doing that, we might reach a point where you can actually trust the system instead of having to trust ourselves. So we come back after the summer. We asked them, like, how did it go? And they were like, yeah, it's fine. So you want to continue? Yeah, let's do it. So we kept going, made a few improvements, got better and better. And then last Monday, a new guy joins the team. Immediately pushes code that breaks the build. And so I found that, and I realized what had happened was that like everyone in the team were so used to just running, we have a simple command, just say go yarn smoke test, and it tests everything. And everyone had been doing that to the point where we didn't realize that you could actually just push code without running that command, and it wouldn't stop you. So we sat down and it was like, okay, so what should we do about this? And we decided to create like a slightly modified version of that smoke test, which just tests the affected parts because it takes a while, and it will run on every push to main, like a pre-push hook. Then after the meeting, he comes up to me and he goes, it was me that broke it, wasn't it? And I go, yeah, good job, thanks. We hadn't found that problem without you. And I was really surprised because he thought he had done a bad thing. But as I said, it's about improving the system. And that's a collaborative effort. And then yesterday I actually got this on the Slack because the pre-push hook was done, and I love the comment, never felt safer. So we don't expect to be right. We expect to be on a journey of constant improvement, which means there is no need for prestige or defending the suboptimal or forever, ever shaming anyone. We improve and we move on. That's what we do. So let's talk user stories. When that same guy who uncovered our problem with the CI/CD system joined, one of his first questions to me was, do you have a big backlog? And I was like, not really, we don't really have one. I mean, we have a board with a few post-its on it, which is basically to facilitate tracking the things that we're working on. It's something the team has chosen to use. It's an easy way to sort of track that stuff. But the main feature descriptions are in our user stories. By the way, who recognizes this situation? Yeah, a few people? Well, you're wrong. This has probably never happened during your career. Because requirements tend to not change. What tends to change is our understanding of the requirements. Because we tend to conflate what we wrote down with what was actually required. I mean, just think about it. It's seldom the case that our customers suddenly change their minds and don't want to be able to see the amount of money in their bank account, or don't want to be able to use their card to buy something in the store. The requirements were always the same. We just updated our understandings on how to achieve them. Those are not changed requirements. So requirements don't change, and they seldom need clarification. What they need to be is thrown away and replaced with actual user stories. So this is a user story. This is a story about a mother whose daughter tells her that a friend at school just got her own bank card, and she wants one also. So the mother downloads an app, signs in with her electronic ID, enters the personal number of her daughter, and proceeds to sign her up for a Neo account with a card. She then contacts the father and asks him to download the app, sign in, and then co-sign the pending agreement. She gets a notification when it's done and proceeds to help her daughter download the app, create an electronic ID, and then sign into the app. So this is a user story. I mean, she has a name. She has a history. We have the problem of both parents having to sign the same thing, but they are divorced. They're in different places. How do we handle that? We have her daughter sitting next to her, which means that probably the onboarding should be really fast because she's going to lose interest and walk away. So this story tells us so much. We don't need any more specifications on how to build this. All we need to do now is build and iterate and see if we hit this brief. That's a user story. We don't only tell stories about our users, though. We tell stories about everything. We tell stories about our progress, about our mistakes, about our aspirations. Remember how I told you about the automated security tests that are run before it gets automatically pushed into production? Well, that wasn't true yet. Because the thing is, we haven't yet built the security tests, and we are not yet in production. But we will be, and we will do that. And the way we make sure that we do that is that we constantly tell this story. We tell this story for ourselves to sort of understand what is important and what is not important. We tell this story to the outside managers. We tell this story to group information and cybersecurity, to tell them what is going to happen so that they can wrap their head around what sort of help we need in building this thing. It's a clear goal based on storytelling. It's also often said that history is written by the victors. I'm starting to lean towards that actually being victorious is sort of superfluous. I think sometimes that all you need to do is write history and you don't have to be victorious. You will win anyway. How many of you have seen this before, the Kinemen Framework? Yeah, okay. So I'm not going to go deep into it, but basically it sort of categorizes problems you have into 4 categories. It's not called simple anymore, it's called obvious now, but I couldn't find a picture with that, so I went with this old one because it looked nicer. So basically it says, like, you have your problems that are obvious. There's a clear-cut way to solve them. Which side of the road should you drive on? Well, basically all you need to do is you check a list and see if I'm in any of these countries, it's the left side, otherwise the right. So you sense, you categorize, and then you respond. This is where you find best practices. Then you have the complicated domain. That's where you still have a very clear connection between cause and effect. It's just that it might require more information to sort of work it out. So this is where you build bridges. This is also where Lean lives. This is all about repeatability, about optimization. So that's the complicated domain. This is where you do your analysis, and then you can respond. And then we move into the complex domain. This is often conflated with the complicated, and that's why so many people get it wrong. Because in the complex domain, complex systems are based off of multiple simple processes that interact, which means that it's very, very hard to determine what's going to happen next. So if you have a complex problem, you cannot analyze. It will not help. What you need to do is you need to probe it. You need to try to do something and see what happens. And then you can sense, and then you can respond. And the bad news is that it's non-repeatable. So this is where Agile lives. This is where we go into experimentation to tell us whether to proceed or not, whether to keep going forward or to veer left or right. And then we have the last quadrant, which is the chaotic quadrant, which is basically where you need novel strategies, like when you don't have time to react. If the building is on fire, you just need to act, get out of the building. Then you can start thinking about, what should I do? Should I try to put out the fire? Should I call the fire brigade? And like a lot of time later, you might actually investigate why the fire started. But that's not where you start. So in a world of complicated problems, cause and effect are well known and understood. The world is predictable. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction. That's what we expect. In the world of the complex, every action has a unique and system-altering reaction. In a complex world, every action changes the set of possible action. That's why your plans will always fail if you try to make them, because as soon as you act, the map changes. In a complex world, the only way to keep your bearing is by holding on to and evolving that story that you tell, so you remember what it is that you're trying to achieve as you probe your way forward. And the story of Neo is strong. It's spreading throughout SAB. It's slowly, little by little, starting to shape the future of how we develop digital products. Soon, we'll create the second product team that's modeled after the way of working from Neo. That does not mean that they will be working in the same way. It means that they will build their own processes based on the same principles. They will be able to learn from the Neo team of what worked in Neo, but it's not prescriptive. When Toyota Production System became popular and then got renamed Lean, GM sent down some experts there. So what Toyota had basically done was this. They said, okay, let's move all the decisions to where all the information lives, which is on the factory floor. That's where we're going to make all the decisions. And the people on the factory floor are going to be constantly working on improving the process. So that's what they did. Now, GM tried to copy this because it was wildly successful. So what they do? They sent a bunch of people over with notebooks to write down every single step they did on the factory floor. They made a big booklet, they went home and they said, this is how you should run the production. And it was a disaster, complete failure, because that was not the point. By the time they landed, Toyota had already changed the way they worked, because the people doing the job were constantly improving the processes. Has any one of you seen, the Spotify model of organizing yourself with teams and tribes and chapters and blah, 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 blah? They don't work like that anymore. He even said it in his talk. This is how we work right now. It's going to be different next week, different next month. Never copy the outcome, copy the process, copy the learnings. And that's what we're trying to do now, slowly but surely. So if you want to be part of that story, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Or if you'd rather, just create your own story. Thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions. There is a microphone that you should use for asking the questions since this is being recorded. Otherwise, people won't be able to hear it online. So do we have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, sorry.
Oh, nice.
Long story short, if you are cancel the pull requests, but how can I manage with the bad code practice, which every developer could actually push the shit to the main branch?
Yeah, so if someone pushes shit code, I will assume that it's because of some sort of lack of knowledge. If they push shit code because they're malicious, we should not have pull requests. We should fire that person. How do we avoid shit code based on lack of knowledge? Well, what we do is we always work on the same thing. The entire team is working on the same story all at once, together. The default is that we pair program. When people feel like it, they will work by themselves. Sometimes you just need some time to yourself. You just want to, poke and prod a bit to learn some more, and then you can start talking again. So people are constantly going in and out of pairings. We sit, so usually everyone is there 2 days a week, and then it's working from home or. But when we sit there, we sit so everyone has their backs to each other, so it's easy to just swivel your chair around, or you could share your screens using VS Code Live Share and stuff like that. So it's actually about cooperating and co-creating, which means that there won't be shit code in there unless I wrote it because I have commit access and I tend to write shit code sometimes. I shouldn't be writing code at all because I'm the product manager and I keep telling them I do not code. And they keep telling me the Git commit log tells a different story. Any more questions? Oh, there.
How does your user research and feedback look when your target users are children? How does that differ from when your customers are adults?
In quite a few ways. So the first thing is that it's a lot more complicated to interview children, because if you just like barge into a school and start pulling children into a room, people will generally react negatively. So it's been a lot of like process around getting in contact with schools and getting permissions to meet these kids and yada yada yada. The second thing is when you interview children, you have to be very careful about how you phrase your questions, because it's even easier to have like unintentionally leading questions with kids than with adults. The third thing that we've seen is that when you show what's called a trigger material, like what do you think about this, what do you think about this? For an adult, it usually, like, all you need is like a couple of blocks and some arrows and stuff, and you go, yeah, that seems fine. For a kid, that doesn't work. You need to be like the fidelity, the graphical fidelity of the trigger material has to be like a lot higher. So we actually we hired a consultant who'd been working with Toca Boca for quite a while, because we realized we don't know these customers. We don't know how to work with them. So, but we learn a lot.
Thank you.
Let's see, I see a hand there. If I miss your hand, it's because I've got a light in my eye, so I see very poorly. So.
Question here about the backlog. I know you said it, and I've heard it in other talks also, that the backlog is bad. Mm-hmm. I mean, conceptually, it's a simple list. So why is it bad?
It's because for me, the backlog is sort of like, the shed where you keep all the stuff that you really should be throwing away, and then you don't clear it out until you move, and then you start filling up another shed. It's like a lot of things might be a good idea at some point, and in my experience, those things that are good ideas at some point tend to return by themselves, which means that if you keep track of a lot of stuff that you're not going to be doing right now, it sort of becomes a burden, and you can always also get like despondent over the amount of stuff that you have not done, and you tend to veer towards solving the things that you thought were the problems, but are no longer the problems because you performed an action and you changed the set of possible actions. So that's why I think it's important to keep the backlog as short as possible, just in time, and focus on what are we trying to solve for our customers.
Hey, so you fired some shots at the Agile cargo cult, and kind of emphasized that we should focus on the process, not the rituals. But that does not necessarily mean that every ritual in and of itself is useless. So would you say that there are some Agile rituals which you actually can successfully copy without going full Agile in your development process?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I'm definitely not against Agile. I think Agile is still a very, very good idea. It's just a very overloaded word that has gotten a lot of bad connotations. In SAP, we use SAFe, for example. Was it Modifier Resad? Shitty Agile for enterprises. So no, I think it's also not about focusing on processes. I would say this. So a process is an emergent property of doing work. So as you do work, you might note that some things work well and some things work badly. So you update those, and then you sort of tend to follow those patterns. Now, that pattern is a process, and that's why you should never focus on the process. You should always focus on the outcome, and processes will emerge. When it comes to rituals, I would say that's sort of when process meets storytelling. So yes, I definitely think that there are rituals that you should try to implement, but you should try to implement and see what happens, not implement them and see how well you adhere to them, if that makes sense. Anyone else? Yes?
Thank you. Oh. So you mentioned that you were lying when you were saying that you were in production and talking about the security tests that you're running. Is there a risk of overpromising, as it could be viewed as you're actually committing to the results that you're presenting there?
Yeah, yep, there's definitely a risk. We've been quite bold in our statements of what we're going to achieve. The way that we try to also temper that, on the other hand, is that we are like painfully transparent every time that something doesn't work out. So we regularly have show and tells for the entire organization. As I said, storytelling again. We've actually started having a segment there called Our Greatest Shits, where we go through like our most spectacular failures since the last show and tell. And I think that's one way that you can work on like not overpromising, because it's like what we're doing is we're not promising. We're saying this is our aspiration. This is what we're trying to achieve. And by the way, next time we meet, we will have done it. And then we meet next time and we go, nope, we didn't. Because it turns out that was really hard. So now we're doing these things, so we're still on the way. Or it turns out that was a really shitty idea, so we canned that. So I think that's sort of the way to temper that. Because if you're always saying it depends and maybe and blah, 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 people lose interest. So I think it's better to just boldly say that, yep, we're going to have onboarded our first pilot customers by Easter break in Sweden. That did not work. We're hoping to onboard them on the 10th of December. No, we're going to onboard them on the 10th of December. Let's see if that works. Any more? No? Then I thank you very, very much.